Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Within Range Coaching Podcast. I'm Ranger, certified holistic success coach, and in this podcast, I'm breaking down the journey that entrepreneurs face as they start their organization, find solutions to the roadblocks in their way, and create an impact that lasts. So if you're an entrepreneur, nonprofit leader, or purpose-driven community member that wants to learn how to grow your impact and develop yourself as the person behind the mission, then this podcast is for you. I know you're just as eager to get started as I am, so let's jump right in. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Within Range Coaching Podcast. Guys, I am on the west side of Arkansas. I want to say finally, but I don't know if that is the right word for it. It's just kind of like, this is just where I'm at in the moment. I made it through I'm only like 4 miles away from the Oklahoma border, I think. So pretty close to finishing up my, fifth state on my walk across the country. And getting from Mississippi to Arkansas was one of those things that were kind of giving me a lot of grief. I was really confused about and kind of worried. A lot of the routes were taking me through Memphis on Google Maps. And I think I mentioned this on the podcast before, but when I was in Georgia, I made a post about my route and I got a bunch of don't go. I wouldn't walk through Memphis. I wouldn't do that. Doesn't sound like the greatest idea. And I don't know, got a lot of links and articles, things like information sent to me that made me go, maybe Memphis is more of a fly in and visit the cool places kind of area and not so much a walk-through area. And that brought me to trying to figure out the next best bet, which would be to cross a bridge a bit further south from Mississippi into Arkansas. And while I was making those posts and looking at the maps, there was one bridge near an area called, Helena. But Google Maps wouldn't let me walk across it. Ended up getting over there. I met up with the mayor of Marvel in Arkansas, and he said, there's not that much shoulder on that bridge, but I think it's walkable without your cart. Great. He got me a hotel room right on the border. I was able to walk across the bridge just fine. And I started asking him for a little bit of help. I was going to be walking through Little Rock in about a week or so, and I could use some help and support in the middle of the state. He said, no problem. I'll share it for you. Lee and I shook hands. I kept on scooting across, heading west through the state. And not more than a day or two later after he shared that post, I got reached out to by a woman who works for, this is what I was getting at, I guess, or what I was getting from the messages. But she is the executive director for a hostel in Little Rock. And I've never stayed at a hostel before. I wasn't really sure what to expect, I guess. But I figured, hey, if someone's reaching out to help out, I'm more than happy to accept the help and kind of just say yes to new experiences. So I canceled the hotel room that I had originally had for Little Rock. And when I got to Little Rock, I walked to the Firehouse Museum and Hostel of Arkansas, where I was eventually met by the woman that messaged me. And they gave me a place to stay for a couple nights, showed me around, showed me the super cool hostel. We'll get more into the history of it later. But no, it was just an amazing little experience. And I was able to convince, enroll, whatever you want to say, the woman that reached out to me to be on the podcast for today. So today we are joined by the executive director of the Firehouse Museum and Hostel of Arkansas, Miss Ann Ballard Bryan. Ann, how are you doing today?
Doing great. But like I said, we've had a lot of severe weather come through. So we were up most of the night dodging tornadoes.
Yeah, we'll get more into that later. I hate to kind of say, but I've been pretty lucky avoiding the bad weather. I had a couple host families that either let me stay an extra day or were able to pick me up, move me around, and be on call. But I can only imagine a lot more of the stationary folks, how, I don't know. It's such a weird conversation topic to jump straight into, I guess. But how does one dodge tornadoes? What does that how do you deal with all of this constantly?
Well, you watch the local weather a lot. We have a lot of apps on our phone that every time severe weather starts to approach, our phone alarms go off. And then you can tune into the local weather stations. And we have some phenomenal meteorologists here in the Little Rock area and all over Arkansas that keep us really updated on the weather, especially during the spring season when the tornadoes are hitting. And you always constantly have the safe place in your, wherever it is in your house, stocked with a charged up cell phone charger, water, whatever it is you might need. And in our case, in my house, I live in a 1908 house in the historic district. We have a basement where the old coal chute was. So we just dive down in the old coal chute when tornadoes start to approach and grab the dog, head down there, and just keep our fingers crossed that it doesn't do any damage to anyone, you know. So
Yeah,
that's kind of how we handle it around here.
it's just a lot of being prepared, being informed, paying attention. Because yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've noticed on a lot of the weather apps for just the day-to-day weather, it's not very consistent, I guess. Or maybe
Right.
I'm just not used to, I don't know, weather in the South. But yeah, no, it seems like weather, especially right now, it's pretty much all people can talk about. Like, not even just from a, hey, how's the weather? It's like a, hey, like, are you prepared? Like, do you have this? And that's something that I get constantly is people asking what I have, like, preparation wise, which isn't a whole lot. I mean, I have, I typically have what, a day or two worth of water on me at all times. I think right now I technically have enough for about a week and a half of food. But
Mhm.
when you're walking in the middle of nowhere, and by nowhere I mean not like many stores, not many houses, it's definitely nerve-wracking, especially when it's not sunny and warm out.
Right. That's when you kind of keep an eye out for the culverts and the ditches and things that in case you have to run, go seek shelter. We've been on the road. You were talking about Memphis, coming home from Memphis and got stuck and just pulled over and hid under the bridge culvert until it passed over. So, you just constantly, when weather's approaching, you have to be on the lookout like, okay, where around this area can we go?
Yeah, no, what was it? I think that was one of the first things somebody, I think in Georgia, told me because they start, oh, you're getting here around tornado seasons. I was like, okay, let's say you were walking on the side of the highway. What happens when one approaches? Oh, hide in a culvert, like get in a ditch, brace yourself, basically. I'm like,
Mhm.
that sounds terrifying. And that was something I didn't even think of before I really did the walk. Like, I was so focused on the day-to-day stuff, I wasn't really so, I guess, worried about those crazy things that could happen.
And it is terrifying because, like I had mentioned to you before, we had a direct hit on our house
Mm.
by a January tornado, which is kind of strange, several years ago. And we were down in the old coal chute, and the noise was deafening. The air pressure changed, so it kind of knocked the air out of our lungs. And it all got quiet and it was pitch black because it knocked out all of our electric poles and everything. It was sort of like when we opened the door to that basement, we thought we're going to see like munchkins. um, because we had no idea if the house survived. It was so loud and crashing. And when the electric poles were getting blown over, the explosions of them and things like that. It took our roof, so we had to get a new roof. But luckily, other than that, we stayed pretty much intact considering that our next door neighbor's house was kind of cut in half and diagonally across the street, that house was completely picked up by the tornado and there was nothing left of it except its foundation. So it's just a strange thing you live with in the South, I guess.
That's so. It's just how people out here talk about it. Like, oh, took the neighbor's house. Like it, we just rebuilt. Like it's just such like a weird. I don't know. I guess the way that it's like a testament to like the human spirit. It's like, well, this is what you deal with. Like we're prepared. We're alive. We're safe. Minimal injuries other than now we need a new roof, and I guess we can just go to the roof store, and or however that works. So. But I know that, I guess to kind of jump into the actual topic, I know that, emergency preparedness, like natural disasters are something that are very prevalent. I mean, anywhere. Okay, maybe one more thing about the natural disasters. I was driving with someone and I asked them, that question like, oh, what do you do if there's a tornado? And he kind of looked at me funny and was like, hey, didn't you do drills in school for tornadoes? I was like, oh, I had earthquake drills because I'm from California. I don't think we have tornadoes. You know what I mean? So it's interesting how they're kind of everywhere. There's something unique all over.
Mm-hmm.
But was kind of combined or like, I don't know, brings everyone together is fire safety.
Yes.
Fires doesn't matter where you are. They can kind of hit anywhere and decimate and all that kind of nasty stuff. I know that's something that is really big on what the Firehouse Hostel does and, bringing that awareness, bringing information. I know that's a little bit of what your intention is today. Mm-hmm. Could you just kind of share what you'd like listeners to walk away with this episode with?
Well, like you said, fire doesn't discriminate. And we actually lost a home to a lightning strike fire. So, natural disasters can also cause fires. We've seen all of the fires out west that have taken miles and miles of casualties in houses and in lives. And so preparedness for things like that, but also a very conscious effort of what I can do in my house to make sure that my house stays safe. And since we lost a house to a fire and lost absolutely everything in it, except for my grandmother's iron skillet, that was the only thing we found when we went through the rubble. And so I kept it. But now I'm very conscious of cleaning out the dryer, lint, not burning candles in the house, making sure that your electricity is up to date and that your fire and carbon monoxide detectors and all those things are working well. One of the reasons our house was a complete loss is the cell phone company. It was in the country. And so we had a landline on purpose for alarm systems because the tiny town where we lived had a volunteer fire department. And then we also had cell service, but the cell service was very sketchy in that area. So the phone company was coming in and working on the lines. Lightning struck, hit the house. Because the phone company had disconnected that area to work on the lines, our alarm did not get through to the volunteer fire department. And luckily, a person driving down the little highway saw smoke and got on their phone and called. But by the time anyone got there, the house was a total loss. And so sorry, it's very emotional, but going through that experience of losing everything, it makes you very conscious about fire safety and all of the men and women that showed up to put out the fire and risk their own lives. It's very emotional. Sorry.
No, you're okay. No, we don't push away emotions on this podcast. Yeah. So, I mean, that's the hard thing, right? Is all of us know fires are dangerous. We all know that these things are, devastating, that they affect and impact people so negatively, but it's not until it's just terrible to say, it's not until it happens to you or someone close to you that you really see the actual effects and what it does.
Right.
And I mean, despite the total loss, if that other person hadn't seen that and, informed the fire, it could have been worse. It could have spread. It could have been, yeah. It could have gone from a house to a town very quickly, I'm sure.
Yes. and acres of woods,
Yeah.
pine tree forests all around. It could have been very devastating. And so these brave men and women that when they leave for work every day have no idea what's going to happen while they're at work that day. In Little Rock, our fire departments are not volunteer. Our firemen and women are actually also have to be EMTs. So they're not only responding to fire emergencies, they're responding to all kinds of emergencies. And so it just gives you such a great respect for those men and women that go out every day and face a lot of danger.
Yeah, no, depending on when you listen to this podcast, my future father-in-law, he was a fireman, a fire chief for the counties that, well, my fiance and them all lived in growing up. So yeah, there's definitely some, I don't know, good poignant reminders there. And I mean, even just staying at the Firehouse Hostel, what was it, John that does the tours?
Johnny, yes.
Johnny, yes, sorry. So Johnny does the tours. I mean, he even has some like very unique items in the tour that are good reminders of the dangers and, the real life implications of, I don't know, what these people go through.
Right. Yeah.
And the one I'm thinking of very specifically is the glove that's melted to a helmet.
Mm-hmm.
It's remarkable.
And that young man lost his life and left behind a wife and kids.
Yeah.
And I think he was only something like 29, very young.
Yeah. And it's just, they're out there putting their lives on the line in order to prevent others from crossing that line, I guess.
Right.
But yeah, we'll get more into the firehouse in just a moment. But in terms of your background, what I found kind of fascinating is now you are the executive director for the Firehouse Hostel.
Yes.
But you weren't exactly, I'm not sure if you had firehouse background or if you were a firefighter. I know that you had a very unique, I don't know, career before before being at the tip top of a museum. So can you just talk a little bit about what you did?
Well,
interior designer, but when they said interior designer, it's very much not what I was thinking of originally. Not HGTV interior designer.
No. And that's kind of the misnomer of a lot of the HGTV is most of us don't do anything like that. But my first career, I actually went to the University of Arkansas as a chemistry major and then went to the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences and got a doctor of pharmacy. And I practiced pharmacy for about 12 years. And it was rewarding, but it wasn't something that I got up every day and just adored doing. And so I decided to go back to school and got a bachelor's and master's in interiors. And so I worked for a little while for the Department of Arkansas Heritage because I obviously love history. I live in an old house. The house that we lost was an 1850s house, and always involved in my own family history and historical tours and all of that. And so I focused in those degrees on historic preservation. But then Hawker Beechcraft called me and asked me to come interview to design jet aircraft, private jet aircraft. And I thought, that sounds fun. Okay, I'll try it. And if I don't like it, I can go do something else. And so I was there for about 10 years designing aircraft. And then because of all of my historic preservation, I got a call from the University of Central Arkansas to come teach historic preservation class in their interiors department. And so I just had recently retired from that and started volunteering for the Firehouse Museum for a fundraiser. And how I kind of got involved with that was my great-great-grandfather is the first name on our fallen firefighter memorial on the state capitol grounds. And I don't know if you got to see a photograph of it when you were here, but it's this enormous bronze sculpture on the capitol grounds that has different firefighters in different equipment. And then there's a wall of names of all of the fallen firefighters. And so my great great grandfather was the very first one in Fort Smith, where you are now. And so coincidentally, his wife, after he had passed away, his wife died in a fire. And so it's always sort of trickled in our family history, this whole firefighting and history kind of thing. And so then they needed an executive director. And I thought, well, I'm retired, so I can kind of do whatever I want. And so I beefed up my resume and I applied for the job. And they were crazy enough to give it to me.
You're like, suckers, got him.
So I've kind of had a very circuitous route through my career.
Yeah, I was going to say chemistry to pharmacy to this to that, and just like all these different strings kind of led back to, I don't even know if that's a circle. Maybe it's full circle because of, I guess, of your own. It's a weirdly shaped circle. Let's go with that. Because it doesn't necessarily make sense in terms of the career, but it sounds like that personal, like ancestral history, a lot of other things align with where you're at now.
Right.
Gotcha.
And the strangest thing of how I found out about you is the way that I know Lee Guest, the mayor of Marvel, Arkansas, is Lee Von Helm, the famous drummer from the band that played in Woodstock and extremely famous in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. He was born in a little place called Turkey Scratch, Arkansas, which is right on the border of Marvel. And his little sharecropper shack that was his boyhood home is one of the projects I've been working on for years to restore his home and turn it into a home museum. And so that is how I met the mayor of Marvel, by that historic preservation effort. And so we became friends and are friends on Facebook. And so it's very strange that my association with that whole Lee Von Helm story kind of connected me to you.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we kind of like very briefly chatted before we started recording, was just it like the strings that you put out. Like, you never know who they're going to cross with. You never know what, I don't know, unique experience you had 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago will kind of, I don't know, I keep saying full circle, will kind of bloom, or something will happen with that so far down the road that you didn't even think of it anymore.
Right. And it'll be something really random.
Like some homeless guy walking across the country. But yeah, and I think that's such another interesting thing is, I mean, that's something that I've seen a lot on this podcast too, is people start off in a very different career than where they are now. And something that I learned a lot during my financial coach training was there's a huge difference between the snapshot and the film reel, where you can take a snapshot of anyone at any time, but you can't think that that snapshot, that career that they're in, is who they are the rest of forever.
Right.
Not to say that that won't affect the rest of the movie, but it's a piece of it. Hey guys, Ranger of Recordings Past jumping in real quick to talk to all of you coffee and tea lovers. Are you ready to brew up something amazing? If so, I've got just the thing for you. Cold-Blooded Caffeine Company. This isn't just any coffee, it's your ticket to a great boost of energy that helps save the rainforest. Trey and McKendrick, the founders, were able to find the perfect intersection between wildlife conservation and high-quality coffee. With each sip, you're supporting wildlife conservation efforts in coffee-producing countries, since 5% of every bag sold goes directly to protecting our planet's precious ecosystems. I've been hooked for a couple years now, ever since I picked up my first few bags at the Sacramento Reptile Show, which is exactly why when I had the opportunity to partner with them for my walk across the country, I jumped at it. My personal favorite has been the U.S. Ark Bourbon Barrel Aged Blend, followed closely by their classic Rainforest Blend. They also have multiple flavors of tea, so there's something for everyone. So drink up, make a difference, and savor every moment. Go ahead and check the link in the show notes for the referral link for some coffee, and don't forget to use the code RANGER at checkout to get 10% off. Cold-Blooded Caffeine Company, coffee with a cause. Hit the link in the show notes and grab some purpose-driven coffee today. Of those different snapshots from, working in pharmacy, working here, working in interior design, how did those experiences influence you as a executive director for a nonprofit?
Oh, wow. That's kind of a hard question. I think you take kind of every experience you have. For instance, when I was a professor for a long time, I would think back on what did my favorite teachers do that helped me? And then those teachers that were just awful, what did they do? And how can I avoid ever doing anything like that? Because I think everyone going through school has the teacher that really helps them and you think about throughout the rest of your life. And then you have those teachers that were just the bane of your existence. Listening to other people's experiences, like when I was designing the jet aircraft, our clients were extremely wealthy people because they could afford private jet aircraft.
I would assume so, yeah.
Some of them were private people that they were just buying it for themselves. And then some of them were corporations that were buying it for a business, to get around the country for their various business activities. And, I kind of had this preconceived notion of what an extremely wealthy person was like. And then I would sit down and talk to them about what they needed in this fabulous machine. And they were just really normal, everyday people. And they also worried about their budget. Now, their budget was completely different than my budget. But, they would say, really, my coffee pots in the aircraft is going to cost this or something. And so getting to meet people from all over the world that way was a great learning experience. And then when I was a professor, I took my students every summer to Florence, Italy, and taught historic preservation, history of architecture and art there. And so traveling and meeting just random people on the train, and if you got lost and you stopped a person on the street and, asked for help, that kind of thing. So I don't know that I can say this one experience plugged in exactly to this, but I think it's kind of a combination of learning all of that stuff and kind of learning what works for me and what doesn't work for me, and trying to assimilate all that information and channel it into what you're trying to do now. If any of that made sense.
Yeah, well, I think that's the other thing too, right? Is that it's so difficult to say, oh, this one experience, if it wasn't for this, I would never be the executive director for the Firehouse Hostel and Museum in Arkansas. Like that's not what it is necessarily, but it's like this collection of experiences. Mm-hmm. Like, people wear, like something that we get a lot in startups is you wear a lot of hats, but it's like, you wear a lot of hats, but there's going to be 3 or 4 of the 10 on the rack that you're going to get gold plated. Like they're going to be so nice. Like they're going to get, built up over time. And it sounds like, I'm just kind of spitballing here, but it sounds like, budget management, I'm sure, is insanely important for a nonprofit museum. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how much actual design work you do in the hostel and museum in terms of like what can go where, how to move things around. I know you guys have some building projects coming up, like expansion. So I'm not sure how those past experiences tie into, I guess, you even just being able to talk to the contractors and know what they're saying.
And the architect and, and on our board, we have another interiors expert. And so she and I can kind of speak that same language with the architect that we're using. And because of my historic preservation background, I know a lot about how to preserve documents and books and things like that, and what kind of cases they need to go into in a museum, and what kind of HVAC system you need to have to keep all of those things preserved. And of course, you have to, even a firehouse museum has to be prepared for a fire.
Yeah,
And
even
so,
more so.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, what kind of system do you need to have in case a fire breaks out in the museum to help save the artifacts? You need to have an emergency preparedness policy for anything strange, a tornado, a flood, a fire. Also, just how you accession pieces and maybe de-accession pieces. So they all have to kind of have a registration number and a description. And all of that has to be kept kind of away from the museum and artifacts. So in case there is a natural disaster, you can go to those documents and say, we had this fire hose nozzle that was from 1920 from this company, donated by this person on this date. Its condition was X, its valuation is X, So a lot
Yeah.
of detail oriented things.
Yeah, that kind of makes me think of, like a documented history of the history that you're showcasing in the
Yeah.
museum in case something happens.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Interesting. Yeah. And like you're saying, like just being able to have those, I guess, educated conversations with other people, because I would have no idea what any of those words mean, and who knows what people are trying to say, or, I don't know. My thing is always like, who knows who's trying to pull the wool over your eye, like that's
Right.
always a thing. But I'm sure there's also that different level of respect that when they walk in there and there's someone like you and the other person on the board that knows what they're talking about, and just being able to collaborate more and say, oh, this works better for us rather than this, or, oh, that's a good idea I hadn't thought of. How does this other idea play into there? It's like a different level of collaboration with those shared experiences.
Yes, exactly. And it's so interesting. Johnny Reap, the man who gave you the
Yes.
tour, well, he comes at it from a whole different angle because he's a retired firefighter. So
Yeah.
he's been on the front lines of all of that and seen stuff that I can't even imagine, going through some of the things that several of our board members who are retired firefighters have been through. And so their whole perspective is completely different than mine. And you learn so much of, oh, okay, well, I never would have known how to think about it from that angle because I've not ever shared that experience. When my house burned down, I wasn't there. I got a phone call that says your house is burning down. And I raced there. And by the time I got there, it was gone. So there's just a lot of that experience that I don't even know how to digest it because I've not ever lived through it.
Yeah. And there's so many different experiences around an event that everybody experiences so differently, right? Like, even if he was the one fighting the fire there, he had a very different experience of this event than you did. You had a very different experience from your neighbor who watched it happen. Like all these different people, one event experienced it so differently. So they can
Right.
walk away with different, take things, different takeaways that it sounds like in the case of especially running and operating a firehouse museum, like these are all valuable experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Which I guess valuable experiences sounds like a weird way of saying it, but it's kind of hard to talk about and almost.
Right. Well, and they're all very learning experiences because, like I said earlier, fire doesn't discriminate against anyone. And some of the craziest things can happen that you don't even really think of when you're in your house, that at any minute now something weird could happen. You can have something going on in your electrical system and have a very slow burn. Someone could forget to blow a candle out after a party. A lightning strike that you have absolutely no control over. You can practice all the safety you want, but if your house gets struck by lightning and catches on fire, you have no control of that. And all of those wildfires out west, every time I see one of those, my heart goes out to all of those people because, you know, you kind of walk away with the clothes that were on your back. And, all of the things that like my mother's antique bed was there. Well, I no longer have my mother. So it's these little things that kind of crop up over and over again that you think, oh, wow, I don't have that anymore. And, it is just a thing, but, we do get sentimental about our things.
Definitely. But yeah, and it sounds like, I know that your intention for today was kind of, I guess, spreading that fire awareness and emergency preparedness. Like, is there anything else that you wanted to share there? It sounds like a lot of it is just control what you can control, have some mitigation measures in effect, but you never know when lightning will strike or someone 20 miles away doesn't put out their campfire and causes one of these crazy wildfires. So is there anything else that you would want to share? And
I think the main thing is how important it is just to even have your smoke and carbon monoxide detectors always functioning, because carbon monoxide is a silent killer. And I think if you're going to just only do a couple of things, that would be the top on the list. And to know how to not just go buy a fire extinguisher, but actually know how to use it. Because so many times people go buy it and they put it in the kitchen, which is usually the place where a lot of fires happen, is the kitchen. And then the grease catches on fire and they get it out and they think, I don't even know how to use it. So things like that is, and to kind of your whole family get out the fire extinguisher and say, this is how we use the fire extinguisher. Because what if your 12-year-old kid is at home by themselves and something happens? They need to know how to use those things. They need to know how to call 911. If the smoke detector, they need to know where to go, where to go to evacuate the house, what neighbor to get help, call 911, all of those things. So I think it's a big kind of family thing that everybody knows exactly what to do. You can't see it, but on my doors, we have little stickers that say how many people live in this house, what animals are in the house. So in case something happens and a first responder has to come here and we're incapacitated, they know, oh, 2 people live in this house and there's a dog. And so they know to look for those things when they come to the door because it's already labeled on the door. So all those types of little things that you pray you never have to use.
yeah, and again, I think that's such like the basic message I feel like is it through almost every episode of this podcast is it's the little things that matter. Mm-hmm. Don't get lazy on them. Like replace the batteries.
Right.
Make sure they work, know how to use the things, do the training, watch a YouTube video or two. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like with certain, I guess, like emergency preparedness or like the worst case scenario stuff, what I've noticed from other folks is it's almost like people don't want to know how to use it because it almost doesn't make it seem so real. Like it's not a real risk.
Right.
But by not knowing how to do it, you're making the risk that much more prevalent and worse.
Right. And, since we lost a house to a fire, I know how irrational it is. But before I leave the house, I know I check to see if the iron is unplugged at least 3 times, because just little things like that are so rote every day. Like if you use your iron all the time, you don't think about, it's kind of a force of habit that you unplug it, but then you don't really, so you like was that yesterday that I unplugged it? Or did I, and you go back and check, oh, yes, I did unplug it. And if we leave for vacation, we unplug a lot of things just because you never know what can happen. And we also turn the water valves off to the things like the washing machine, because you never know when a water pipe is going to break when you leave the house. And flood your utility room. So all of those tiny little things kind of just develop a checklist of, this is what we need to do to stay safe in our own house, because heaven forbid that anything catastrophic happen. And it's a lot easier to recover from losing a house than it would be to lose a life.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's the greatest way to end the episode, really, is just if these are the risks, this is what happens, period, right? Mm-hmm. How can we mitigate those the most so that worst case scenario, we lose a few things and not someone?
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, and I mean, that's all that is so poignant and obvious in the museum, in the hostel. I mean, it's a real firehouse, right?
Yes.
Like
yes.
you see it all, you see all the history, and I don't know, I would just encourage folks. I know you guys have the volunteer program as well, which we didn't really get to touch on, but I'm going to link all the info in the show notes. But if people want to stay there for free isn't it like a couple weeks they have to commit to working or being there?
Yes.
So, I mean, there's so many opportunities, and it's such a low price to actually stay in the hostel. That's what I was surprised about too, for what you guys offer there. So, but Ann, if people want to learn more about the Firehouse Hostel, want to book a room, book a stay, volunteer, whatever, what's the best way for folks to get in contact with you?
If they're wanting to book a room either through the website or Airbnb, we're on Airbnb, and or you can call the number if any of that isn't working very well for you. So like, for instance, someone like you who might be walking across the country and they get to a point where their cell service doesn't work for surfing the net, but maybe it works enough for them to make a phone call. Or they get to a little town that has, a tiny little grocery store and not very good cell service. Well, that person might let you use their landline. We still have a lot of landlines in very rural areas because our state is rural, and our cell service doesn't do well everywhere. There's little pockets where I'm sure you've run into them across the nation where you think, wow, I have 0 bars. Where can I get help if I can't use my phone? So any of those avenues, and we love to host people, and we were just really thrilled that you were walking through Little Rock and we got to host you and hopefully draw attention to your nonprofit causes and how important nonprofits are, and sometimes what people have to do, like walk across the country to draw attention to them.
Hey, look at me. Hey, awesome. You're looking at me. Awesome. Now look at these guys. Now look at the people that are doing the real work. Thanks.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like, is, hey, look over here. Gotcha.
So thank you for what you're doing to draw attention to nonprofit organizations, because it is a hard world out there for nonprofits.
Yeah, definitely. So no, I'm definitely glad that I can, highlight those 3 organizations I'm raising money for, and also find an avenue to, shed light and kind of expand the spotlight to bring folks like you guys into it. So again, Ann, I super appreciate it. I'll put all the information in the show notes, and I will let you know when it comes out. Okay. But yeah, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks. It was so nice meeting you, and glad you got to stay here in Little Rock.
Me too, for sure. And as always, thank you, all of our listeners, for spending some time with us today. I personally, I get a kick out of hearing all these different stories and how things are just so crazy. Like, who would have thought 10, 15 years ago that Ann would end up where she is now? It sounds like she didn't even think that was the trajectory her career and life was on. So I think that just goes to show that every experience is valuable in some way, shape, or form. And what you learn today through hardship can be something that you share with the world to prevent more hardship from happening in the future. So if you want to support the Firehouse Hostel and Museum with all the amazing work that they're doing, and you're in the Little Rock area, consider checking them out. Even just going there for a tour, I think would be fantastic. And be sure that you leave a donation for them if you are passionate about fire safety and you want to ensure that they can keep on doing what they're doing and supporting the communities they support. You can donate straight to them on their website, which is down in the show notes. You can book a stay with them. Check it out. If you've never stayed at a hostel before and you're going to be in the Little Rock area, a night, give it a night. Just check it out. I mean, it was far better than I even thought it was. I don't know what preconceived notions I had about hostels before checking them out, but it was a fantastic experience. Everybody there was so nice and genuine. I mean, I got to even meet people from the UK, Australia, other side of the nation. So just the experience of meeting the people that were staying there was even valuable for me. So I'm going to stop singing their praises for now. Check them out on social media. Check them out on their website. I'll leave it all in the show notes. And as always, check out our sponsor for today's episode, Cold Blooded Caffeine Company. You heard the ad read halfway through, but check them. If you're a coffee lover, if you drink coffee, tea, I don't know, you like conservation, check them out. All their information is also in the show notes. And if you use the code RANGER at checkout, you'll get 10% off. And if you listen to the episode that I had with Cold Blooded Caffeine, there's a secret bonus code that you could use for some extra goodies. So I don't know, there's a plug to watch or listen to episode 1. But as always, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate your time. Stay tuned for next week's episode. I'm not sure who it's going to be with yet, but it's going to be another banger. We'd love to see it. Thanks, guys. And as always, make some good happen in the world. Make something happen and have fun, stay safe, and be yourself. Bye now.